feel a little bit tired. There is excellent coffee available over there, but I'd maybe ask that at this point you wait until the end of the session to partake in Australia's finest, and I know I will certainly be needing a coffee after this. My name's Arianna Cowling, and I'm a director at Australia's Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. Unfortunately, Minister McAllister is not able to join us today. She was hoping to open the event, but unfortunately she's had to go off and fight the good fight on climate adaptation negotiations, which, I'm sure we can all absolutely get behind. Today we're going to open with a short video message from Minister Plibersek, Australia's Minister for the Environment and Water. We'll then bring up our panellists on stage for a bit of a discussion around how we accelerate finance into nature-based solutions. If we've got time, we'll have a bit of a Q&A, session, invite questions from the audience, and then we'll hope to have you out of here by 10 o'clock. So I'll start with the video.
Plibersek here, Australia's Minister for the Environment and Water. Thank you for joining this panel today, and I look forward to hearing the outcomes of your discussion. Climate change is one of our triple planetary crises, alongside biodiversity loss and pollution. These problems can only be solved together. As we push towards net zero, we also push towards a nature-positive world, where we protect, restore and manage the natural resources that sustain us. Environmental protection and nature repair is a massive job. Government has the primary role here, but the scale of our challenge means the public sector can't go it alone. We need to muster all of our resources. That's why Australia is hosting the Global Nature Positive Summit in Sydney in October 2024 to drive private investment in nature repair and protection in our region and around the world. We want to bring the best environmental minds to Australia from every continent on Earth, showcasing examples of successful conservation, sourcing new investment for restoration and protection, keeping the momentum going after last year's Montreal Summit. I hope to see as many of you as possible next year in Sydney. Thank you.
All right, so I'll invite our panellists up onto the stage if you want to join. So we're a little bit short on mics, but I'm sure we can all share. So unfortunately, Minister Plibersek couldn't be with us today. But why am I here today? Why do I want to talk? Why do I want to hear people talk about nature-based solutions and how we accelerate private investment into projects that support nature-based solutions? Well, I'm an economist, and when I think about the nature and climate crises, to me, they're really symptoms of the same problem, which is unsustainable resource consumption. We're drawing down on our carbon budget faster than we should. We're using our freshwater resources, our fishing stocks, our forests. We're drawing down on these resources faster than they can naturally be replenished. And once you start to think about the problem in this holistic way, then you realise that those solutions, we also need to take holistic approaches as well. So while the renewable energy transition is absolutely critical, it's also true that there is no net zero without nature. Nature is actually an ally in helping us face the climate crisis. It plays a vital role in building resilience and regulating temperatures, which means it contributes to both mitigation and adaptation outcomes. Nature-based solutions can sequester and store carbon, support resilience in the landscape, sustain livelihoods and healthy communities, as well as building functioning healthy ecosystems. It's been estimated that nature-based solutions can provide up to 37% of the mitigation needed up to 2030 if we're to keep the global temperature rise within 2 degrees. As an ex-central banker, I almost hyperventilated when I saw Mark Carney speak at COP in Montreal last year and say there is no net zero without ending deforestation. It felt like people were finally starting to get it. But the challenge is always going to be finance. and we know that public funding alone is not sufficient. Financial flows to nature-based solutions have been estimated to be around $150 billion per annum, and less than a fifth of that is coming from private sources. How do we tap into those large pools of private capital out there? Well, it's going to require collaboration between the public and the private sector, with scientists, with Indigenous people and local communities. We're going to have to work together to develop solutions. And that's really what this panel today is about, bringing together diverse voices, diverse perspectives, to think about how we can increase private investment into projects that deliver nature-based solutions. So the structure today, we're really going to first start talking about what good looks like. What do we all want from nature-based solutions? Then, once we can establish that common ground, what are the implications of that for how we accelerate private investment into nature-based solutions? And last of all, given that we need to work together, but we have such different backgrounds, we speak different languages, we have different incentives, different capability. What are the key bridges that we need to gap if we're going to work together to efficiently develop and implement pathways that will increase private investment into nature-based solutions? So I'm joined today by 4 incredible panellists, and I'm proud to say they're all women. So we've got Kushla Munro, Head of International Climate and Energy Division at Australia's Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. Mina Epps, Head of the Ocean Program at the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. Jessica Andrews, Head of Climate Accountability at the United Nations Environment Program Finance Initiative. And last but not least, Ari Goring, who is the co-CEO of the Pollination Foundation. So I'd like to start by inviting each of the participants to introduce themselves, and as part of that, talk about why nature-based solutions are important to you.
Thanks, Ari, and again, welcome everyone to the Australian Pavilion. Good to see some friendly, familiar faces out there. This is more by introduction, so maybe you know a little bit more about me and how we think about the relationship and integration of climate and nature issues. So currently head, as Ari was saying, of the International Climate and Energy Division in the department. So we sort of work more directly with Minister Bowen and Minister McAllister. But the responsibility for the climate negotiations, bit of public diplomacy here in terms of what's been happening in the pavilion, but also obviously those really important initiatives that can help, drive the global collaboration and domestic action. And it's always that crossover between what we're doing here and why it kind of also obviously matters back at home. Big focus already at the COP, I guess, things like tripling renewables, big events like that. But, I think for this COP in particular, the coming together, what came out of CBD and Montreal is like a really big push. And, as you'd also see over here on the screen, the big Nature Positive Summit, for example, that Australia is holding. But I actually came into working on climate change, and it was 2009 in the lead up to Copenhagen. And I was the REDD+ negotiator. So for those who know, that was reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation in developing countries. And then we had a few more sort of parts there that encompass the plus. So it's not a new concept. I mean, that was fundamentally about how do you protect, the rainforest basins. And it's really hard in terms of we kind of know the challenge, we know the focus, we know the rule set, but even in terms of what we were trying to do there, because the avoided deforestation wasn't part of the Kyoto Protocol, so it wasn't part of the Clean Development Mechanism. These were issues that were sort of well known and understood, and we've continued to work through that over a number of years. So I was just sort of saying and reflecting in my own mind about some of those big shifts. And nothing's kind of ever new, but, that importance and momentum, and I think it's stronger that I've seen for a very, very long time. So really great to tap into all the knowledge and understanding of these issues, people in the panel, people in the audience, so we can have, as we say, a good yarn about this.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thanks to Australia for hosting us here. We've come to the Nature Day, Oceans Day here at the COP. And so just to say a few words about IUCN. Most of you might know IUCN is one of the world's largest environmental network that we have. And we are also a global standard setter, so we set global standards, but we also work on having some ground truthing, so really having, some boots on the ground and trying to link those local realities into global policy processes. And in this context of the UNFCCC, IUCN has been advocating for nature-based solutions to be included for many years. And going back to your COP15, and I'm not talking about the one in Montreal, but the one in Copenhagen in 2009, blue carbon was almost a laughing matter, and they were really pushing to get that in. So I think one thing that I'm also feeling here today is not only momentum, but also optimism, and sometimes it's important to take stock and see really how far you've gone, or you come. And in terms of the nature-based solutions, the nationally determined contributions, we have a lot of blue NDCs. So 97 of the updated national determined contributions out of the 148 does include marine and coastal ecosystems. So I think that's a major achievement. There's still a lot push to be done to make sure that the ocean is properly recognized in the global stocktake. So we're working on that, but also very proud to say that IUCN has been working with the high-level champion, the Ocean Climate Platform, Ocean Conservancy, and many, many partners to formulate the ocean breakthroughs as part of the Marrakesh Partnership, and what role can industry have. So IUCN is the co-lead for the marine conservation, the marine breakthrough, I should say. So happy to talk a bit more about that later. I'll pass on the microphone, thanks.
Thanks so much, and thank you, Ari, for having me on this incredibly powerful panel. It's fantastic. So I lead climate accountability at the the UN Environment Program Finance Initiative, so UNEP-FI. And there we convene a number of net zero alliances. So my work is to look across them and really help investors and banks who have 10 trillion and 75 trillion respectively committed to transition to net zero by 2050. And to do that, we set these interim targets. And so we're really looking at the metrics and the accountability on the targets moving towards reducing the emissions that are associated with their portfolios. And what we know is that we need to really work in an integrated way with nature-based solutions, because that can help us achieve a third of the reductions that will get us to net zero, especially by 2030. And so this nexus between climate change and nature is really, really critical. And so I'm happy to talk a little bit more once we get into the questions about kind of how our investors and banks are looking at working with others and in partnership, but really to help drive the mitigation solutions as they come from nature.
Hello? Hello? Does that work? Hi. Thank you. What an awesome panel of women. I love that. My name's Arianna. I'm the co-CEO of Pollination Foundation. Our mission is to bring community into the heart of climate and nature solutions. We're a small foundation within a for-profit, for-purpose business, Pollination. It's a climate advisory and investment firm. So we really focus on kind of linking community to the climate and nature solutions that Pollination's advising on and the projects that they're originating. I think what brings me here and what drives my passion is I spent most of my life living in one of the remote regions of Australia, the northwest, a place called the Kimberley, working for an Indigenous-led organisation, the Kimberley Land Council. And so my knowledge comes from spending time with Indigenous peoples on their country over a long period of 20 years, really deeply understanding the interconnection and how we are a part of nature, and that the climate and nature crisis that we're in is really very much a crisis of humanity rather than a crisis of the environment. And so I bring that body of knowledge and wisdom with me now into this space where I have the privilege to be able to bridge local to global and be able to bring that body of wisdom into ensuring that we have a just and fair and equitable transition to nature positive.
Thanks, Ari. And, it's funny hearing you speak. I'm just thinking about all of the thematic days. Today is really about bringing together those themes of finance, nature, oceans, people. This is really about bringing the whole of COP together. So first, I'd like us to kind of tease out what does good look like when it comes to nature-based solutions, and try and find our common ground as well. And I'd encourage you as you respond to build off each other. And Minna, I'm going to start with you, because as you already mentioned, the IUCN has actually developed a global standard for nature-based solutions. So I'd encourage you to speak to this and what it describes as the desirable characteristics of nature-based solutions projects.
Thank you, Ari. Yeah, so the IUCN Global Standard for Nature-Based Solutions was launched in 2020. I mean, it's nothing new. I mean, it's a concept. It builds on decades of ecosystem-based restoration and work that's been done. But in order to develop the standard, we brought together different, 800 different people, different institutions to come up, different criteria of how to tackle both environmental and societal challenges. So the nature-based solutions has 8 main criteria, which look at anything from balancing trade-off, accounting for biodiversity, positive biodiversity outcomes, but also to make sure that it's economically and financially viable. So it's really seen as a facilitative tool, so we like to call it nature-based solutions, but they're nature-based actions. So it's really there to basically provide a kind of a benchmarking tool, and when you apply the standard, you can actually get your spider web to see, how are you doing. And not all, a lot of the conservation projects, they are not economically viable, so they're not going to get maybe a strong score there, but it's really, again, a facilitative to say where do you actually can place the impact, or where are the improvements needed. So it's really a facilitative tool that can be applied at project level, etc. Yeah.
All right, so maybe jumping across to you, Jessica. So UNEP-FI, you obviously work with organisations across the financial sector, investors, banks, insurers as well. From the perspective of a financial institution, what does a good nature-based solutions project look like? What characteristics are these stakeholders looking for? And feel free to sort of break it down by stakeholder type, if that's helpful.
Thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, UNEP works across, as the minister herself said, the triple planetary crisis, so climate, nature, and pollution. And that's what we're really trying to do with our different initiatives is bring together this nexus, because we see that so many of the solutions for climate change can come from nature. And that's exactly what we see when we look at the climate scenarios, is that we have to really protect and enhance and rebuild our natural ecosystems so that they can do their jobs and that we can achieve the mitigation outcomes that we want. And that's really, truly the only way to continue to get to 1.5. And what we do is really try to help large banks and investors to understand the science, to understand the opportunities, and to understand the risk. So the first thing that we're doing is working through tools like Encore, which looks at natural capital opportunities and risks, and helps to break this down at a sector level, because that's what investors and banks are doing. They're looking at the economy through these sector lenses. And then what we're doing is helping them to establish guidance on how to set targets. And what we do there is, between our climate and nature programs, and we have guidance and expectations on both of these, is connect the types of targets that they're setting for climate with the types of targets that they're setting for nature, and building on the existing standards and definitions that are out there. And so to do that, we do have to really identify projects that are economically viable, but that also operate at scale, because it's really challenging to connect from the ground to the top. And these large, banks and insurers and investors are really being brought to the table to help try to solve these issues. But there's quite a lot of issues, to address here. And so being able to bring them together, look at them holistically, sector by sector, is really, really important to kind of achieving that change. And I think the last thing that I'll say is, when we look at how banks and investors and insurers are looking at this, if we look at the top 50 banks, for example, we see that over 36 of them have made some sort of biodiversity or nature-based commitment and pledge. And it's really important that we recognize that and that we're helping to build the capacity that they need to then deliver on those pledges, because making that kind of transition of the existing flows and stocks to new and projects that are more in line with climate and nature goals is not an easy feat. And I think we need to recognize how much capacity and how much partnership that really does take.
Thanks, and I'm glad you brought up that theme of partnership and capacity, which I think will come out further in this discussion. So, Ari, jumping over to you, your work has focused on promoting the best practice models of Indigenous people and local community-led solutions. So when you think about nature-based solutions, what does effective engagement with Indigenous people and local communities look like?
Thanks, Ari. I love saying that. Not many times you get to have someone with the same name as Ari or Ari. So I think, for me it's trust. I've heard that over and over again in the conference from Indigenous peoples. We need to be able to speak the same language. Oftentimes, the way that ideas are spoken about, they're the same idea, but they sound completely different because we don't have a shared language. We also, people say we want to be working in partnerships. We don't want these transactional relationships that are the focus of are underpinned by contracts and great due diligence details. We want to have relationships. So how do we move from a transactional market-based model and start to bring in more Indigenous ways of working, which is in partnership? So based on that, we just have released a report around positioning Indigenous peoples and local communities to lead in nature markets. And what we found through working with our partners is the first and most important step is really thinking about that values alignment. What's our shared vision? How do we work together? What are the ways that we work together? How do we ensure that community aspirations are kind of embedded in that partnership model? How do we ensure that we finance and support community organisations to be able to work with their own communities to explore these opportunities and talk about them in a language in a way that community can then understand and start to engage in the partnership to move to the create pillar, where you can then co-create projects together. And through that going slow, you can then go fast. So ensuring that you get those first pillars of alignment, really good engagement through exploring the opportunities, and then moving into that co-creation pillar, where then really starting to think about with communities, how do we, and I think we've seen in Australia, through the Indigenous-led carbon industry, why that's been so successful is because Indigenous knowledge is embedded in the methods that we use to verify the carbon reductions through right-way fire management. And we haven't seen that uptake in Indigenous-led models anywhere else in the world, and that's because that method is based on Indigenous knowledge. And so once we get to that kind of co-create pillar, then Indigenous peoples and local communities can really be in a position to lead. And that's where we need to get to, because 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity is on Indigenous lands. So they're the best place to be kind of leading in these models.
Thanks, Ari, and I also like getting to say thanks, Ari. It's great. So over to you, Kushla, last but definitely not least. You're here representing the Australian government. So can you speak to the sorts of nature-based solutions projects that, governments want to see flourish? And also, what is the role of government in creating the enabling environment that fosters the delivery of those types of projects?
Thanks, Ari. My panellists have just really gone through the absolute essence of what good looks like, or what it should look like, and practitioners or leaders in that space. So you're right, in terms of a government's role, and there's really practical things in terms of when things are kind of underdeveloped, there's blue carbon ecosystem restoration grants, so we kind of know you can go in, how that money is used and how those programs are designed are so critical. But the really significant thing that the Australian government has done, and the legislation just passed this week, good people like Ari and also Anthony Benny, who I used to work with in the climate area, is, how do you make this easier? And it's a really hard one. Like, a lot of work and consultation went into designing that legislation, because the issue is, like everywhere, we're running out of time. So you've got to do it well, and then you've got to go fast, and then you've got to scale it up. So I think that's the role in terms of good government. If they're listening, they're adaptive, they understand the issue, about how they can create systems and markets to drive the financing even stronger. So that's, if we're doing it well, that's what we're doing.
Okay, thanks, Kushla. And for those of you who may not be aware, so just this week, Australia's Parliament passed the Nature Repair Market Bill, which creates the world's first national voluntary market for biodiversity certificates, which is really about linking landholders, with businesses, philanthropies, other organisations that want to invest in protecting and repairing our environment. So I think we all acknowledge it's hard, but there is some common ground here. So with that in mind, how do we actually accelerate private finance into nature-based solutions? And I think there's two questions here. One is, what do we need to do more of? What is working? What do we want to accelerate? But also, where do we need to go slow and take our time and make sure we get it right? So, Minna, I'll start again with you. And I think in answering these questions, I'd really particularly welcome your views on how do we maintain confidence in the outcomes being delivered by these sorts of projects?
Yeah, so great. So Kushla here basically talked about the legal aspect that Australia is doing. So I also like to add something else that Australia is doing in terms of being an enabler to unlocking, getting the private sector investment. So Australia actually is funding our Blue Carbon Accelerator Fund. And what that is really a twofold. It's basically looking at, some readiness support, but also going forward to kind of the implementation support to really give that also developers, the technical assistance, the financial, not just the financing, but really the technical assistance to go along with it. And that is, I think, really, really key, that we can have these form of kind of re-granting mechanisms to really kind of spur not just innovation, but then what we do to ensure that, these are kind of in line with our own criteria. We do apply the nature-based solutions criteria just to see where they benchmark. But then, again, you have to go back to see, okay, but there also, for example, IUCN has ESMS guidelines as well to follow. But then, I think the main thing here is also to kind of demonstrate, whether it's through a scorecard or blueprint that we are producing, to really make sure that we can demonstrate, to showcase these nature positive benefits, and that way it will also be more attractive for financiers if it's something that can be clearly, demonstrated. So I think that's one of the kind of key things in terms of how do we make it used. But then we also work with other systems, so the systems of environmental and economic accounting. We also have a partnership with GOAP, which stands for the Global Ocean Accounting Partnership, which is also really a great way to kind of build that ocean accounting of different benefits. So I think that's kind of really showcasing, back to your question, like how do we unlock it? Well, we need to make sure we can give that very early stage support to project developers. And as we said, to make sure we get it right, there can be lots of good intention. I'll take one recent example. People might argue that aquaculture is not a nature-based solution. So we want to have those benefits, like involving, engaging the community. So you start with seaweed farming, women seaweed farming. I just came back from visiting one in Zanzibar. And that's great. And then if that's a success story, and then it just brings it to scale immediately. But then what we're seeing quite often is that they put it where the seagrass beds are, and then they are completely tremble. That means that the carbon sink is lost. So that's also how we look when we apply the nature-based solution, to see how do you balance those trade-offs. So I think that's also an important issue going forward, to think about what are the potential trade-offs and make sure you get it right early at the design phase. So yeah, I think I'll stop there to allow my other fellow panelists to share.
Okay, so Ari, I'm actually going to jump back to you. So drawing on your experience, 20 years of working with Indigenous people and local communities, you've been right at the front line. What have you seen that is working when it comes to, increasing private finance for nature-based solutions? And where do we need to slow down if we're going to make sure that Indigenous people and local communities are meaningfully engaged in these types of projects and also benefiting from projects funded by private finance?
Big question. I think starting again, I'll just go back to that partnership model, co-designing solutions together. So we know particularly from the corporate sector, there's a lot of interest for communities to be partnering directly with corporates and companies. Companies are starting to think about, we've just got our heads around accounting for nature, accounting for carbon, and our emissions. How do we now start to think about accounting for nature, and what does that mean for us as a company, and what does that mean back through our supply chain? So I think there's a huge opportunity to get this right here, where companies are starting to think about their impacts and dependencies on nature, thinking back through their supply chains. Where does that then interconnect with local communities and Indigenous peoples? How do we come together and talk about what did this place look like before these impacts were here, because Indigenous peoples are best placed to provide that advice. And then what are some of the ways that then we can reduce our impacts and contribute to nature positive in a way that is done in partnership with communities. So then, as I mentioned, what are the methods and the verification tools for us to be able to say, this is what it looks like now, where do we want to be, and how do we measure our progress towards improving nature in different locations? So I think there's a couple of ways, that sort of contribution towards nature positive, and then just that overall connecting and having those conversations together about how we get there in partnership, as opposed to, can I just purchase some credits and then I've offset my, impacts and we can be done and we'll move on. That's not getting us where we need to be. So this kind of model of partnership is really important if we're going to achieve our nature positive goals.
Thanks, Ari. And so Kushla, again, coming back to you, very keen to hear what lessons the Australian government has learnt, whether from carbon markets or otherwise, about the role that the government can play in accelerating private finance for nature-based solutions, while also making sure that we get the right outcomes. And I think this is particularly important, in the context of, this announcement around the nature repair market.
Thanks a lot, Ari. You're absolutely right. So Australia has had a carbon market legislated, so not just in the voluntary side, for over 10 years. The integrity and transparency is absolutely critical to that. And there is that combination in terms of all of the best practice kind of aspects, because if you don't have any social license to be doing those projects, they're going to fall over regardless. Where there's sort of been, not choose my words carefully, not, you can be, we're about climate, we can measure emissions or avoided emissions. It's really hard to sort of measure the benefits of nature and biodiversity, local values associated with that. And so that difference in terms of actually saying, yes, we'll get criticised and we'll take some risk here, but we do need to move past that and say, yes, we're going to value it. We probably won't get it right all the time, but it does go back to, I think, just that integrity kind of aspect. And for a government to be involved, you kind of raise the bar. And I think that's incredibly important to seeing potentially these markets develop. Thanks,
Kushla. So part of the reason that we're hosting this event today is because as you would have heard Minister Plibersek speak, in October next year, Australia is hosting the world's first global Nature Positive Summit. And much like today's event, the summit is about bringing together a range of actors from the public and the private sector, science and academia, environmental NGOs, Indigenous people and local community leaders. It's about bringing these diverse voices together to catalyse action that will increase private investment into nature. But we know it's going to be hard, right? There are challenges here, and there are gaps between us that we're going to need to bridge if we figure out, if we're going to figure out how to work together and come up with solutions. So the last question I'd like to ask today is, what do you think is the key gap that we need to bridge between us? Given that we come from different vantage points and we do speak these different languages and we do have these different incentives, what is the key gap that we need to bridge if we're going to work together towards developing and implementing effective solutions that increase investment into nature-based solutions? So, Kushla, I might actually start with you on this one. Sorry.
Well, big gap was like, we want everyone to come to Australia and go to our global... It's going to be in Sydney in October. You are all invited, everyone here. You thought you were just signing up for a free coffee, but you're coming to the summit. No, but more seriously, it's just this maturity of all this knowledge, all this work that's been happening. In terms of that gap, it is about momentum. It is continuing to push and get the good things happening, especially in this area. And so I'm not going to be technical from that perspective. I do think that gap as well, just from my experience of what we've done domestically, but also working countries in the Pacific. I probably had more engagement in countries like Papua New Guinea and Fiji and others. But it is also not leaving people behind. And I do think as far as we go in developed countries and our own sort of systems, we always have to think about who's also not at that table and making sure that they're there as well.
Minna, over to you.
Okay, great. I think it's a great idea for this conference, so thanks for the invitation. I think in terms of bridging the gap, I mean, you alluded to it before, we don't speak the same language, for example, and I think that I can give you a concrete example. So I'm a marine biologist, and when I started to engage in the kind of finance space, I was all excited about nature-based solutions, well, marine nature-based solutions and, scaling it up. But scalability for me, and I was talking to an investor, and I was talking about physical scaling up, like how many hectares of seagrasses or mangroves. And of course, the investor was talking about financial scalability and how do we scale it up. I mean, words like deploy, it means different things, return on investment. So it's not just, okay, how do we create that common language? I think you have a great opportunity at this conference to bring together the developers, IPLCs, etc., and really think about, how can we do it? And also think about maybe the format of the conference. I mean, we come here, and I think what's really missing in a lot of these conferences, it's often something that's tagged at the end. If you have time to stay on, there's field trips. So, I mean, if you could take it to have more kind of really demonstrate, because I really feel that's how people learn. That's certainly what sticks with me when you actually go out to the field. I mean, how else are you going to be able to then link and talk about it at these conferences? So I would say that would be really something that, really incorporated into the program rather at the tail end. And then I would really love to work, with Australia. IUCN would love to work with Australia to think about how can we tailor, and having listened to Ari here and also the financial ability, there are a lot of entrepreneurs within Indigenous community, locals. So it's not just those young, hungry entrepreneurs that wants to get market access into a developing country. How could we, for example, tailor and have a specific window that just capturing and do nature-based solutions based on Indigenous people's knowledge? That would be fantastic, and then really use that as a showcase. So anyway, looking forward to see your project, and really also tackling, nature-based or biodiversity credit as a holistic view, and try to get it right. Not easy. Thanks.
Thank you. So I think I have 3, actually, gaps and challenge areas. The first one is about flows. So 7 trillion. 7 trillion is a lot of money. And right now, that's what we estimate is in nature negative flows. This is actively working against our agenda. So the first thing there is to really shift what is there, it's being in a negative contribution to this agenda, to a more positive contributor to this agenda. And so it's not just about finding new financing for this, but really shifting what's there and making sure that it is working in the right direction. The second thing is data and risks. So we know that the TNFD, the Task Force for the Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, is starting to really bring the challenges that financial institutions face when it comes to nature-related risks in their portfolios to the front, to the spotlight. So they're really seeing how nature and risks are relating in their portfolios, and that's really a language that financial institutions speak. And then the third area, and with that we really need data. So to understand the risks properly, you really need proper data. And so that's where we get to this standardized sort of approaches and standardized metrics that can really help financial institutions to take the decisions they need to take to shift that capital. And then the third thing is really this enabling environment. So I'm really pleased to hear, Christian, the work that you are doing, because I think what is really needed is a positive policy environment that can help support and move these things in the right direction, because it is not easy. There are a lot of barriers. There's a lot of capacity gaps. And in order to really get financing to nature-based solutions, we need the financial community, the work on the ground, and the policymakers all working together and speaking that same language to kind of help transition this over.
Cool. I think all of those things. And particularly, so when I think about financing nature, I think about it from a community perspective, and I think it's really important for us to think about nature market opportunities in particular as not being the silver bullet that's going to kind of save the financing problem. And so from an Australian context, the investment and increasing the investment into Indigenous ranges is critical, because they are the workers who are, like the nurses and the doctors in the hospital, they're getting us to nature positive. So increasing Indigenous ranges, investing in Indigenous protected areas is a really important mechanism. You can have all the parks and protection to meet our 30 by 30 targets, but if we're not actively stewarding those lands, then they just become paper parks. I think then, layering those types of kind of foundational investment, and then on top of that, carbon and nature credit opportunities as another revenue stream, layered with Indigenous kind of and cultural-led tourism and native food products, then you really start to get to a diversified nature economy, and that's going to get us where we need to be. And so I think if we can, at the Nature Positive Summit, be able to really showcase some leading examples that are Indigenous and community-led, that do that stacking and layering of revenue streams, because the finance is just the finance piece. It's the work that's being done on the ground that's most critical. So how do we start flipping the lens and building it from the bottom up, rather than thinking about it from the what return can we get from this investment kind of lens, thinking about this is the aspiration, the community aspiration. What are the kind of pillars of finance that need to support that?
Thanks, Ari. And I absolutely agree with you, Jessica. I think risk is often our entry point, with financial institutions, and that's part of the reason why the Australian government is actually funding the work of the TNFD. We have a TNFD work program in Australia, because that really has been a way for us to open conversations about nature. But ultimately, we need to shift that conversation from risk to opportunities. And yeah, I agree, showcasing leading examples. What does good look like when it comes to nature-based solutions? What does success look like? I think that's going to be really critical next year. And I note you've given us a long list of homework, which is great. Anthony and Louise, if you're listening, I hope you're taking notes as well. So I think we do have time for some questions. We've already got 2 hands up. Excellent.
You probably do not know me. I'm Willie Low-C. So this is my 7th COPs. So thank you, Kushla. I salute for what Australia has done. especially starting up with the finances, was in Scotland. So with Scotland, there was about 65% of the finances of the world. That's where we started. And last year as well, and here we are now. We're talking about the nature positive. For me personally, is the language. The partnership for us, for Tonga, is unionship. Because partnership, you can come and go. So next. So unionship is about longevity. And the other thing is for us as well, our nature-based solution is our culture and heritage. And I'm pretty sure that's where it is. So those are the languages. Yesterday, I was part of the roundtable of pushing the ministerial of the culture and heritage. It's the biggest event of the COP28. And I think that's where it's coming in. My suggestion is this. I am on the NGO. I don't have a direct assistant for the finances. For me to be here, I have to quest how to pay myself to get here for the last 7 COPs. But despite that, if you come to Tonga, I have the peace cemetery in Tonga. And I invited everybody to come to Tonga on that level. But let me go for the next one, which is the biggest one. IUCN and also Australia, we're just finishing Tonga this year of the nature-based solution of planting about 1 million mangroves in Tonga. So it's only for this year. It's a pity. I'm looking into quest for you as the best solution for Australia for the COP31 for the next 3 to 4 years. Work with IUCN, come to Tonga and continue to doing the $1 million for each year. And that's an amazing, that you can have an example of that. The second one is the resilience building. I'm not here to say to build in Tonga, but I can tell you how benefit of it is to build the resilience building in Tonga because next year. The third thing is for me, because we held the Pacific Forum next year as well. So in order for me to say this, I can say this because I am an environmentalist and I'm also a global activist as well. So my voice matters because we are the people who do the work, right on the grassroots. And for me personally, it's so important for Australia to see where are the areas that we can benefit each other. And the third thing is I'm going to ask you this. Before your Nature Positive Summit in Sydney, I'm inviting you to come in January. Tonga is hosting the 10 days triennial at the National Gallery of Victoria. It's the work that I co-partnership in Glasgow University with one of the top artists, and it's all about the oceans on fire. The work we did was based in Vava'u, and it was in November. We have the COP26. January the 15th, we have the biggest eruption ever. I predicted that something big will happen in the Pacific because I have been watching the skies. So with that note, come to Tonga, set your example in Tonga because there you can have an amazing journey. At the moment, that's all I can say. Malo bit.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Alison, and I have a question. We were just talking about barriers before, and one of the complexities I'm seeing, obviously in nature-based solutions and the environment as one, is everything is intrinsically linked, right? What I really want to understand is as we move forward, especially when we look at things from political portfolios to industry sectors, we are so used to seeing things in pillars and for everything to be seen as one. And I feel like on the ground, when we're starting to look at nature-based solutions, and we know when you care for the environment, absolutely everything is intrinsically linked. How do you get over this barrier when you're trying to deal with ministries under different portfolios or different industry sectors? How are you guys going to, in your roles, really look at how to bring them together? Because you can't even consider nature-based solutions if you can't get all different industries together in one group. You can't get your political portfolios together to really sit down and address some of these issues. I'd be really interested to see how you're going to address that.
Sorry, can I just firstly thank you, Willie. I know you are you speak the truth and your truth and consistently do that, and such a passionate advocate. So thank you, and a good friend of Australia. So we do appreciate that. And it was at Victoria, Melbourne. We've got one of the Deputy Generals from the Victorian Climate Environment Department there, so I'm sure we can help promote that work. The point about, well, like, yes, it's really hard to get... Exactly. I mean, at one level, right, you know, if something is important and it's valued, it's always about the priorities that are put upon that. And the practices, whether it's at a community level or with government agencies, you know, at one level, it's always being open to, I like this word now, the unionship. Maybe we need to think more about the unions in terms of what we've got to create, because this needs to be enduring, not some tick-a-box exercise. And so that's just what I wanted to kind of note on that matter.
Yeah, thank you very much, Willie. The truth does still matter, so thanks for that. Yeah, to your point, I mean, yes, it is very complex, and I think especially when you come and dealing with governments, it is a challenge because there's different ministry, different priorities, etc. So, of course, nature-based solution as a language has been quite socialized, and it's understand that it's integrated, you know, but I still think we have a very long ways to go to realize, I mean, how do we get to nature? I mean, the ocean pathway, I would say, to nature-positive economies and societies. And I think to be a bit more like concrete, where there are demonstrated example where it works, is on marine spatial planning. I mean, it's not just nature-based solutions. I mean, we have many tools in the toolbox. So I think marine spatial planning, we're seeing that really cook up. And I mean, taking a Pacific as a region, you know, you need to do it also in a regional perspective as well. So I think a marine spatial planning, and there's some good examples there, is one key avenue as well, and also to make sure that how do you have the glue between that? I mean, you can talk, I've heard a lot about blue economy, and quite often they forget to put the word sustainable blue economy or even aspirational sustainable blue economy. And, you know, how do we get that message through that we can go around the world and then we realize, where we want to be is actually regenerative blue economy. So anyway, that was just my 2 cents attempt to answer your question, but good one, thanks.
I think it's a really great question, so thank you very much. I think what one of the challenges that's embedded in your question is how do you get from global financial markets to projects on the ground, right? These are universes maybe of separation, yeah. That's right. And I think one way we try to do that is, as I was mentioning earlier, is really try to bring together our climate, our nature, our pollution work so that we're using common language, common definitions, kind of common aspirations, trying to, as much as we can, use the science to link between them so that we're seeing where, you know, solutions are not then, you know, causing challenges on the other side. So really trying to look at, you know, the direction of investment holistically. And we have so many, you know, tools that do this, but I will, you know, still acknowledge that it is a challenge to bring these all together. And one of the ways we try to do that is through kind of sectoral work. So can you look at climate, nature, and pollution for, you know, sectors and industries, but I think we do need to make advancements in terms of doing that locally on the ground.
I think language is super important, and maybe we should reframe to community-based solutions.
Barry Hunter from the chair of the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation and chair of Terrain NRM within the Wet Tropics region of Queensland. Thank you, Ari, for your comments, and I like that one around community, but we also need to have cultural-based solutions as well, because as this gentleman just pointed out here, and thank you, sir, nature is culture. You can't separate that. But my question, particularly to Kushla, is when you look at the level of investment into Indigenous protected areas, and everyone likes Indigenous protected areas in Australia and abroad. You know, we've got examples of that being copied now elsewhere in the world. Everyone likes Indigenous ranges, but the disparity between the funding that goes into Indigenous ranges and particularly Indigenous protected areas compared to the conservation estate investment is around $14. The investment that goes into IPAs sits around $1.87 per hectare. So that disparity, the rhetoric and the you know, you can like everything that you want, you know, and feel good about it, but that shows the disparity in regards to what's been delivered on the ground. So I want to point that out, but also point out that, you know, like, if government gets serious about that investment, and it's not just government, you know, like we're talking about other nature potential finance sources, but there needs to be some really serious look at that, because there's real big inequity there. And doubling ranges numbers, you know, everyone's celebrating that in Australia, the number of ranges and investment into ranges. That doesn't fix the problem. In fact, it exacerbates it. So I just want to point that out, and it'd be good to get a response on that.
Thanks, Barry. Haven't met you yet, but I look forward to catching up a little bit more about with you and on these issues. I don't know the details of what we're investing or not investing, but I completely take your point. You know, if we're really serious about this, how do you make it work? And so, as Ari was saying, from that sort of experience of knowing how you make this work in Indigenous communities, you're telling me it ain't working, so what can we do better? I just think it is working. It could work better. It just can always work better. I think that's the point, right? We're always thinking, okay, how do we genuinely try to make this work? And so there's just such an openness, and happy to maybe talk a little bit more offline on this one. Yeah.
All right, I'm conscious of time. I did promise we'd get you out of here by 10 to get your excellent Australian coffee. I just really wanted to thank our panellists here today. Not only have I been tasked with a lot of homework, but I think it's also been a rich discussion that really highlights that partnership is really key if we are going to increase private investment into nature-based solutions. You know, we are trying to link, you know, big pools of private capital with people on the ground, and that is not easy, right? We're going to have to figure out how we link those two, and we're not going to be able to take a cookie-cutter approach. I think a lot of our existing models, even our existing models around carbon markets, they're not always going to work. We're going to have to be really creative in the solutions that we develop, and I think it's going to be hard, but it's not impossible. You know, I heard someone earlier this week talking about the fact that, you know, they were in a room with the CEOs of HSBC and Barclays talking about investing in mangroves. And, you know, 2 years ago, they never would have thought, you know, that they could ever see such a thing happen. So I do genuinely believe that things are changing, but it's not going to be easy. And, you know, I'm really hoping that the summit can deliver on some of these themes, and it really provides us with an opportunity to all come together to think about what these solutions actually look like. So please join me in thanking our panellists for their time today. All right, free coffee.